I was confronted with this idea that there are many statements which say that the earth is about 6,000 years old, or almost 6,000 years old, or nearly 6,000 years old. But there are these three statements which state more than 6,000.
Today, we're diving into a topic that has sparked countless debates and discussions. Is the earth 6,000 years old? Many Christians believe in a young earth based on biblical genealogies, while others have different interpretations. In this video, we're going to watch Professor Walter Veith's presentation on this subject. We'll explore the biblical perspective on the age of the earth, examining the scriptures and the spirit of prophecy, seeing how they align with or challenge scientific viewpoints.
So besides the signs of the times, are there any indications as to how close we are to the end? Well, let us venture onto this ground. And it's not an easy decision to venture onto this ground, but if we stick to the Bible and the spirit of prophecy and do not go down the road of time setting, then perhaps we should discuss this issue. And the problem is that so many lectures have appeared on the internet giving times and dates and events as they will be supposedly happening in the world. And I want to just briefly discuss some of these. So there are a number of ways in which people are trying to calculate where we are standing in the stream of time. And some adopt the apotelesmatic principle. Now that is a strange word, so let me try and explain it. One of the people who actually used this apotelesmatic principle was Desmond Ford. And we know, of course, that that was highly problematic. This principle affirms that a prophecy fulfilled or fulfilled in part, or unfulfilled at the appointed time, may have a later, recurring, or consummated fulfillment. This is what he wrote on the Day of Atonement and Investigative Judgment in Glacier View, manuscript, 1980, page 485. So this idea says that the prophecies that are in the Bible have more than one application and can be, well, in the future, have a different application. Now, firstly, I would like to state that this principle is based on Greek philosophy. And there is no internal consistency with reference to the Bible. It would place Bible prophecy on a par with Nostradamus and mingle futurism with the biblical, historic, continuous method that Jesus himself used. Now, the way to interpret Bible prophecy is to let the Bible speak for itself. And if you go to the book of Daniel, there is a historic thread running through the book of Daniel, a continuous historic fulfillment throughout the prophecy. This is the historic continuous method, and this is the biblical method. Any other method puts us on dangerous ground. Let's see how Jesus used it. Jesus himself used the historicist method to interpret Daniel when he announced, "The time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand." Mark 1:15. This verse alludes to the prophetic fulfillment of the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9:24-27 that predicts the appearance of the Messiah. There is a prophecy that has a time frame and then states when the Messiah would come. And that prophecy, if you calculate it out, comes to the year 27 AD, which is the exact year when Jesus commenced his ministry. He was 30 years old, but our calendar is wrong, and any children's encyclopedia will tell you that. So that the time when he was 30 years old was actually 27 AD. So we cannot use that method, this apotelesmatic principle, because how would you apply it? How would you, for example, take the images of Daniel chapter 7, which are historic continuous and tell us how the kingdoms will arise? The first is like unto a lion, Babylon. The second like unto a bear, which is Medo-Persia. The third like unto a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. That was the Greek Empire. And then the terrible beast, which was Rome. And then the 10 horns, the European powers that would come out of that system. That is a historic continuous flow. If you wanted to take that prophecy and apply it to the future, then you would have to use those images and appoint other issues to those images. So you could, for example, say, well, the lion is the symbol of England today, so it must be referring to England. And the eagle would be a symbol of the United States of America, because that is their symbol. And the bear, you could make a symbol of Russia, and then you could come up with whatever you wanted to put into it. That's how you use the prophecies of Nostradamus. You fit anything into it, and you have no basis other than conjecture. It is dangerous, and we shouldn't go there. The second principle that people use to make time prophecies are, some adopt the Jubilee principle of calculating the precise time of the end. And they count the Jubilees from the time of Adam all the way to our current time. And there have been some lectures in this regard. And some people believe that the coming of Christ is imminent, maybe in the next year or so, depending on how the Jubilees work out. And they take the issues of exactly when the Pope spoke to the 2 houses in the United States of America, and they come to those conclusions. Again, how exactly do you determine it? And the issue becomes so complicated that in the end you really struggle to follow the lines of reasoning. Now, it's very important that we study the verse which says that no one knows that day and the hour. Let's have a look at that verse. Matthew 24, verse 36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man. No, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Now, that's fascinating. 1 Thessalonians 5:1. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write unto you. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as the thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. So Paul is saying that God's people should not be surprised, because they should be studying the scriptures and knowing the time. So let us look at this verse in Matthew again. Matthew 24, verse 36. But the day and the hour knoweth no man, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So, not even Jesus knows the time? Now, in 1865, James White wrote a booklet entitled The Second Advent. And the code for that book is SEADV, Second Advent, obviously. And he has a very interesting study around this verse. Let us read what he writes. Many hastily conclude from this text that nothing whatever may be ascertained relative to the period of the Second Advent. But in taking this position, they greatly err, in that they make this class of texts prove too much, even for their unbelief, and which at the same time erase these declarations against others uttered by the Savior, the most plain and pointed. We object to this position. So when asked about the signs of the times, Jesus gave an abundant answer in order to explain the circumstances around his coming. So how is it that we can interpret this text? Can anything be learned from the Bible relative to the period of the second advent? Is a question unsettled in many minds. This is a grave inquiry, and from the nature of the subject is worthy of close investigation and candid answer. How did Christ himself treat the subject? When the disciples inquired, "What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" he did not reprove them for prying into that which was purposely hidden from all men. After all, when we go back in history, when the destruction of the world came in Noah's day, didn't Noah tell them exactly what was going to happen? Wasn't even the time predicted, 120 years? No, he answered them in the most definite manner. He even states that there should be signs of that events and adds, "When you shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors." The simple fact that the Lord mentions signs of his second advent is the best proof possible that his people were not to remain ignorant of the relative nearness of the event. And to this evidence, his declaration that when these signs should be seen, his people should know that it was near, even at the doors, and the case becomes an exceedingly strong one. But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, he continues. No, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. If the text proves that men will know nothing of the period of the second advent, then it also proves that angels will know nothing of it, and also that the Son will know nothing of it. Till the event takes place, this position proves too much. And I agree with him. Because if Jesus is one with the Father and is fully God, then he must know the time. So let's see how he resolves this. So till the event takes place, this position proves too much, therefore proves nothing to the point. Christ will know of the period of his second advent to this world. The holy angels who wait around the throne of heaven to receive messages relative to the part they act in the salvation of men will know of the time of the closing events of salvation, and so will the waiting, watching people of God understand. Now, is he being presumptuous? Let's continue. An old English version of the passage reads, "But that day and hour no man maketh known, neither the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father." This is the correct reading according to several of the ablest critics of the age. The word "know" is used in the same sense here that it is by Paul in 1 Corinthians 2 verse 2. "For I determined not to know," can be read "make known," "anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. Men will not make known the day and the hour. Angels will not make it known, neither will the Son, but the Father will make it known." There's a quote in the Spirit of Prophecy where in early writings she says, as the people of God looked up and waited for the coming of Christ, the time was made known by the voice in heaven, the Father making the time known. So we do not know the day or the hour. He continues and says Campbell, McKnight argues that the term "know" is here used as a causative. In the Hebrew sent of the congregation, he feels that is to make known. Christ's answer is just equivalent to saying, the Father will make it known when it pleases him, but he has not authorized man, angel, nor the Son to make it known. Just in this sense, Paul uses the term know. In Corinthians 2:2, I came to you making known the testimony of God, for I determined to make known nothing amongst you but a crucified Christ. Albert Barnes, in his notes on the gospel, says, others have said that the verb rendered knoweth means sometimes to make known or to reveal, and that the passage means that day and hour none maketh known, neither the angels nor the Son, but the Father. It is true the word has sometimes that meaning, as in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 2. That makes a lot of sense. Because how would it be possible that he who is very God and had no beginning, Jesus Christ, would not know the hour of his coming? Now I'm going to venture onto a ground that is highly problematic. But if we stick closely to the spirit of prophecy, is there anything that we can glean from this? And this is the concept of the great cosmic week. In other words, 6 days which become then a day for 1,000 years, 6,000 years plus 1,000 years for the millennium. Now this is a concept that has been around for a very, very long time. And we find in Psalms 90 and in 2 Peter the following statement. Psalms 90 verse 4. For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. 2 Peter 3 verse 8. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. The book of Revelation refers to the 1,000-year millennium period 6 times. Let's look at one of those verses. Revelation 20 verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads, or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So there are 6 statements regarding this 1,000-year period. Some of them talk about the devil that was bound 1,000 years. Now, Robert Johnston, the chair of the New Testament department at the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary of Andrews University, wrote an article on the subject which can be found at this webpage. And in this article, he shows that some of the early Advent pioneers, most notably Jane Andrews, were actually firm believers in this principle, but that this idea was later discarded by some, including Uriah Smith. It's interesting that as late as 1899, Adventist publications stated firmly that the end would be sometime around the year 1900. This belief that the end will come sometime during a somewhat extended period with an end point can be called soft time setting, as contrasted with the setting of a definite firm date, hard time setting. So this is the theology, and this theology, although it was used by the early pioneers, was basically discarded and has, received some very poor press, and people have shied away from it. Now my question is, does the spirit of prophecy throw any light on the subject? In other words, I know that Jane Andrews believed it, but does the spirit of prophecy throw any light on the subject? And we will look at some of these, and this is not time setting. I'm not time setting at all. I'm just looking at what does the spirit of prophecy say. And I'm not talking about the time or the hour. And I'm not interested in any prophetic interpretation where we take the prophetic times of Daniel, for example, and make them literal times in our dates. that is a system of futurism which is not in harmony with the Bible. We're looking at this cosmic time. And I want to know, what does the spirit of prophecy say? There are in fact 42, 74 if you count the compilations, 6,000-year statements, and 41 4,000-year statements in her writings. Now, how did I get interested in this? My interest in these statements comes from my study of creation versus evolution, particularly with regard to the age of the earth. However, it was proposed by some scholars that these times are not definitive and simply meant, in other words, these 42 or 74 statements on 6,000 and the 41 on 4,000 years, that they were not meant definitively, and that they actually meant since the beginning, during Old Testament times. But at least one of these was definitive when she stated the world is now only about 6,000 years old. That's in 3 Spiritual Gifts, page 92. Now, Ellen White uses the phrases about 6,000 years 13 times. She uses the statement almost 6,000 years once, and she uses the statement nearly 6,000 years 12 times. But there are 3 where she states more than 6,000 or over 6,000. And the rest of the statements just say for 6,000 years. Now, I was part of a delegation in the church where we discussed this issue of creation. And I attended a lecture by some of our prominent theologians where this whole issue was discussed. And it was stated quite categorically that none of these statements on the 6,000 years can be used to determine the age of the earth. Now, I'd just come into this church, and I'd been an evolutionist, and my whole world was turned upside down as a consequence of the study of the prophecies, and then eventually also a study of our origins and evolution, which of course entailed the age of the earth. And as I listened to these lectures, which by the way are also written in journals, these same sentiments, I was confronted with this idea that there are many statements which say that the earth is about 6,000 years old, or almost 6,000 years old, or nearly 6,000 years old. But there are these 3 statements which state more than 6,000. And therefore this was presented as proof that you cannot take them as definitive. Now, this concerned me. And moreover, it was stated in those publications and in those lectures that where these statements are made about the 6,000 years, it's probable that she was influenced by the margin of the King James Version, which contained Ussher's dates, and therefore in the concept of the stream of time or the time period where they were living, it was logical for her to just adopt these statements of 6,000 years. And it bothered me. So I put up my hand in that meeting and I said, now, I just have one problem. And this is the problem. If she was influenced by the margin of the King James Version to say that it was 6,000 years, then what else could have influenced her in terms of all her other statements in the spirit of prophecy? Can we then still trust the spirit of prophecy as an inspired source, or shall we just lay it aside? Well, there was another document which was then discussed, and the issue was explained as followed. Yes, we believe that she was inspired, but that she didn't have the same authority as the other prophets. She was as inspired, but didn't have the same authority. Now, that's an oxymoron. How can you be inspired and not have the same authority? Does God speak through inspiration with authority only through some people and with no authority through other people? Was this exegetical or was this homiletical? That was the question. Well, it bothered me because it disturbed my apple cart when it came to the age of the earth. I wasn't thinking at all about what we are discussing today. It was at that time just the age of the earth. And so when I came back to my home in South Africa and went back to my university and started working on my lectures on evolution and creation, this thought bothered me. And I prayed and I said, Lord, this makes no sense to me. How can it be almost or about 6,000 in one place and more than 6,000 in another? If there is anything wrong with this, then you must show me, because else I will have to discard virtually everything she wrote. Because if she's influenced by every wind of doctrine out there, then how can I trust the spirit of prophecy? And I filed it in file 13 and left it. And a few years later, a colporteur gave me a little pile of pamphlets. And I read them and I went through them. And suddenly I almost fell off my chair, because there was one particular pamphlet that caught my attention. But before I get there, here's one statement that I found interesting from the biographies. In other words, this is not Ellen G. White writing, because it was stated that Ellen White never ever received any visions regarding the time that this controversy or the age of the earth was concerned. But here in the biographical volumes, 1 Bio 366, we read the following. The vision of Lavette's Grove, Ohio, on a Sunday afternoon in mid-March 1858 was one of great importance. In this, the theme of the great controversy between Christ and his angels on the one side and Satan and his angels on the other was seen as one continuous and closely linked chain of events spanning 6,000 years. So in other words, the great controversy vision actually had this time frame. It's interesting, this vision has put Seventh-day Adventists in a unique position with clear-cut views of the working of providence in the history of our world. A viewpoint quite different from that held by secular historians who see events of history as the interplay between the actions of men, often seemingly the result of chance or natural developments. In other words, this vision and others of the great conflict of the ages yield a philosophy of history that answers many questions in prophetic forecast, gives the assurance of the final victory of good over evil. So it was very definitive. So I would like to look at some of these statements. And what was this pamphlet that I had received? What about the more than or over 6,000 years? Well, this pamphlet had the following information. Warren H. Johns, the seminary librarian at Andrews University, researched this issue, and he came to the conclusion that Ellen White believed that there were exactly 4,000 years between the creation of man and the birth of Christ, and that her consistent position was that the world was less than 6,000 years old. Warren H. Johns, Ellen G. White, and Biblical Chronology, Ministry, April 1984, pages 20 to 22. Now, personally, I do not quite agree with his statement over here, and we'll talk about why in a moment. Because he takes it to the birth of Christ, and I believe that is not the correct way in which she used it. But be that as it may, she clearly believed the 4,000 and the 6,000. Now, what about those three statements? Well, the first one is found in Historical Sketches, page 133. More than 6,000 years of continual practice, referring to the devil's arts. This statement does not deal with the age of the earth or the time since the fall, but with how long the devil has been in the deception business. And of course, deception started in heaven, which could have been hundreds of years for all we know. So it has nothing to do with the age of the earth. It has to do with how long the devil has been in the deception business. And after all, he deceived a third of the angels. So that takes care of that one statement. The second statement is from the story of Jesus, and it says, "And for more than 6,000 years, in its forms of beauty and gifts of sustenance, the earth has borne witness of the Creator's love." Now that sounds like it could be problematic, but if you study it, this statement comes from the chapter, The Home of the Saved, and deals with the new earth, when the earth will be about 7,000 years old. So it has nothing to do with the 6,000 years period of sin. Now, the third statement is the most problematic. This statement comes from Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, page 154, and states, the continual transgression of man for over 6,000 years. Now, in 1977, Dr. Robert Gentry of Earth Science Associates contacted the White Estate regarding this statement and was told that this was a copying error and that the original first source from which it was taken was 3 Testimonies, page 491, 492, and did not contain the word over. Moreover, Ellen White did not use the word over when she used the earlier material to write the book Desire of Ages. So, in other words, the 3 statements do not negate Ellen White's stand that the earth is almost 6,000 years old. Now let's have a look and see exactly what the spirit of prophecy says. And again, I reiterate, I'm not time setting. I'm studying the spirit of prophecy. I want to know what the prophet said. I don't want to know what a theologian thinks the prophet thought or what influenced the prophet. I want to know, what did she say? So let's ask the question, according to the spirit of prophecy, how long will sin reign? Well, here is a statement. After 6,000 years of sin, the earth was renewed. The great plan of redemption, this comes from Adventist Home, results in fully bringing back the world into God's favor. All that was lost by sin is restored. Not only man, but the earth is redeemed to be the eternal abode of the obedient. For 6,000 years, Satan has struggled to maintain possession of the earth. Now God's original purpose in its creation is accomplished. The saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Now I want to come back to this statement at a later stage. But the point for discussion right here is that she definitively states that for 6,000 years, Satan has struggled to maintain possession of the earth. That is a very direct statement. So my question now is, where, according to the spirit of prophecy, are we in the stream of time? So when, according to the spirit of prophecy, will 6,000 years have elapsed since the fall of man? Well, let's start with the 4,000 year statements. At Christ's baptism, sin had reigned, according to the spirit of prophecy, 4,000 years. And that was in 27 AD. Let's make sure. Because there are so many of these talks out there which give dates, either calculating, as we saw, from the birth of Christ, or from the crucifixion, or from any time period in between. I want to know exactly. I don't want to know about. What does she say? So let's be careful in the way we approach it. Christ in the wilderness of temptation. Let's just stop there. What year was that? Christ entered the wilderness of temptation directly after his baptism, and that was in 27 AD. Let's make sure. Christ in the wilderness of temptation stood in Adam's place to bear the test he failed to endure. Here Christ overcame in the sinner's behalf 4,000 years after Adam turned his back upon the light of his home. So since the fall of Adam to the temptation in the wilderness, which took place in 27 AD, is the time period since the fall of Adam. Separated from the presence of God, the human family had been departing each successive generation further from the original purity, wisdom, and knowledge which Adam possessed in Eden. Christ bore the sins and the infirmities of the race as they existed when he came to the earth to help man. In behalf of the race, with the weaknesses of fallen man upon him, he was to stand the temptation of Satan upon all points on which man could be assailed. So exactly 4,000 years since the fall of Adam to the wilderness of temptation. Let's read another one. The Savior of the world has no controversy with Satan, who was expelled from heaven because he was no longer worthy of a place there. He who could influence the angels of God against their supreme ruler, against his Son, their loved commander, and enlist their sympathy for himself, was capable of any deception. For 4,000 years he had been warring against the government of God and had lost none of his skills or power to tempt and deceive. Again, here Satan was going to confront Jesus in the wilderness of temptation, and he'd had 4,000 years to contemplate how he was overcome Jesus as he had overcome Adam. Let's make sure. On Jordan's banks, the voice from heaven, attended by the manifestation from the excellent glory, proclaimed Christ to be the Son of the Eternal. That is the baptism of Jesus, where the voice from heaven came and said, "This is my beloved Son." So we have a date. It was 27 AD. Satan was to personally encounter the head of the kingdom, which he came to overthrow. If he failed, he knew that he was lost. Therefore, the power of his temptation was in accordance with the greatness of the object which he would lose or gain for 4,000 years. Now listen carefully. Ever since the declaration was made to Adam that the seed of the woman should bruise the serpent's head, he had been planning his manner of attack. We have precise times in this statement. From the fall of Adam up into the wilderness experience of Jesus, exactly 4,000 years. In other words, until the baptism. Let us go to the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. Galatians 4, verse 4 and 5. When the fullness of time had come. We need to know what that is. The Savior's coming was foretold in Eden. When Adam and Eve first heard the promise, they looked for its speedy fulfillment. In other words, that promise that now had taken 4,000 years of time to be fulfilled. They joyfully welcomed their firstborn son, hoping that he might be the deliverer, but the fulfillment of the promise tarried. Those who first received it died without the sight. From the days of Enoch, the promise was repeated through patriarchs and prophets, keeping alive the hope of his appearing, and yet he came not. The prophecy of Daniel revealed the time of his advent. So the prophecy of Daniel revealed the time of his advent from the time that the promise was made that he would crush the serpent's head. But not all rightly interpreted the message. Century after century passed away, the voices of the prophets ceased. The hand of the oppressor was heavy upon Israel, and many were ready to exclaim, "The days are prolonged, and every vision faileth." Ezekiel 12, verse 22. So what were the conditions prevailing at the first coming of Christ? So we know a time now, exactly 4,000 years since the fall of Adam, according to the spirit of prophecy. Please note, not according to me, according to the spirit of prophecy, exactly 4,000 years to the baptism of Christ. Now, what were the conditions? When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son. Providence had directed the movements of nations. Do you not think that God will direct through providence the movement of nations in our time? And the tide of human impulse and influence until the world was ripe for the coming of the deliverer. The nations were united under one government. That's an important point. It was the Roman system. One language was widely spoken and was everywhere recognized as the language of literature. From all lands, the Jews of the dispersion gathered to Jerusalem to the annual feasts. As these returned to the places of their sojourn, they could spread throughout the world the tidings of the Messiah's coming. So let's project to our time. The nations were united under one government. Not yet the case. One language was widely spoken, English, in our time. And the Jews were dispersed through all nations. God has his people dispersed through all the nations. We have many of these conditions. Genesis 11 verse 5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. This is the Tower of Babel, where humanity was united as one, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. So this attempt to unify, God had interrupted. In the time when Jesus came, there was almost one nation ruling everywhere, and in the second coming, it could be the same. Well, let's have a look at this statement. And this is the Handelsblatt in Germany, and it's fascinating that they show the EU as the Tower of Babel with the waters rushing around it with the coronavirus catastrophe. And here in the corner it says, Wir brauchen eine globale Führung. We need a global leadership. We need to become one. We are building a Tower of Babel. Here they decided to build a city. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 118. And in it a tower of such stupendous height as should render it the wonder of the world. These enterprises were designed to prevent the people from scattering abroad in colonies. God had directed men to disperse throughout the earth, to replenish and subdue it, but these Babel builders determined to keep their community united in one body and to found a monarchy that should eventually embrace the whole earth. One king, one moral leader, Do we have such a figure where everybody flocks to him in Rome for moral guidance in the time that we are living in? Thus their city would become the metropolis of a universal empire. Its glory would command the admiration and homage of the world and render the founders illustrious. The magnificent tower reaching to the heavens was intended to stand as a monument of the power and wisdom of its builders, perpetuating their fame to the latest generation. Well, here is Yuval Noah Harari, a very famous author, and he said, we will have a totally different world after the coronavirus. And in this fight against the pandemic, we need one world leadership. Catholic Herald. God's plan is to unite all humanity, says the Pope. So the Pope is calling for this unity.